Hello and welcome to another episode of the Liberator podcast. I hope you liked my additional singing to go along with the end of our theme music. I'm Sam Riley. This is James Silberman. No Russell Hunter this week.
Yeah.
Seems he's off on a lot of episodes now. He's dying, probably. I don't know. Anyways, we're here to talk about the Southern Baptist Convention and all the terrible things that happened, as well as some of the good things.
There were a few good things that happened. So we were in Anaheim.
Little silver lining to that dark cloud.
Yeah. And so we were in Anaheim for the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting. We had a resolution like we did last year for a host of reasons that we'll get into. It didn't go the same as it went last year. And we're going to get into all that, get into the really good things that happened, the kind of not good at all things that happened.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to get into all of it. But I want to start off by saying something. I think the most substantial reason why the resolution was not received as well as it was the year prior is because last year there was a lot of contentiousness for sure between kind of two different sides that are emerging within the SBC. But abolitionism had not yet been caught up in that kind of contentiousness, that kind of interdenominational politics.
Merging or fighting? You say merging?
The emerging.
Oh, emerging. Gotcha,
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The two emerging factions within the FBC.
I blame my bad ears. It's genetic, I think.
Yeah. So before we get into the good, the bad, and the ugly, what I want to talk about real briefly is why I think the resolution was not received as well this year as it was in the year prior, back in 2021. And that is, in 2021, it was the first year we had brought abolitionism to the SBC. And so a lot of people were hearing about it for the first time. And so it hadn't been caught up in kind of the interdenominational politics within the SBC. It was just, hey, immediate abolition of abortion, equal protection for preborn children, abortion is murder. Right? Any Christian who values God's word, who's trying to obey God's word, who cares about their preborn neighbors, is going to support that for the most part. And so we had overwhelming, on day one, when Bill Askell motioned to bring it out of committee, it was like 90% support to override the resolutions committee.
In 2021.
In 2021, to bring it to the floor.
Yeah.
Overwhelming, like almost unanimous support from the messengers. Even though the resolutions committee and the leaders on the stage were opposing it, it was almost unanimous from the messengers supporting that resolution. Now, that was, again, because abolition of abortion, equal protection, these are pretty unobjectionable concepts for the most part. There were a few things in the resolution that maybe, there's more room that people have kind of latched onto and disagreed with. But for the most part, most of that resolution was completely unobjectionable to any Christian. And so it was overwhelmingly supported. But this year, abolitionism had kind of gotten caught up in the denominational politics within the SBC. And so you had the one side that was... that's got their kind of host of issues. The other side has their host of issues, and abolitionism has kind of gotten pulled into those politics. And we were both there. Like, I can report, the interdenominational politics in the SBC are very, very tense right now. Like, extremely tense. And so there's not a lot of trust between the two sides. And so what we had was, whenever abolitionists, maybe not entirely, but for the most part, whenever anyone was speaking to any degree in disagreement with what was coming from the platform, a lot of the people in the crowd, a lot of the messengers just didn't want to hear it. They weren't listening. They didn't care because they just perceived it within their lenses, which are kind of this clash of the two sides within the SBC. And abolitionism has now been caught up in that. And so what I want to say at the beginning of this episode is, as we talk about abolition, as we talk about making preborn children equal under law, please, if you're an SBC person who's watching this, if you have any preconceived notions, right, about equal protection or abolition based on the denominational politics right now, please put those aside. Just listen to what we're saying, listen to the arguments, listen to the biblical arguments, to the kind of the practical arguments about how abortion is going to play out after it's abolished, how the prosecution is going to play out, all that stuff. Just consider what we're saying, and please put away any denominational political lenses that you're wearing, because I think that will help us have a much more productive conversation here. So with that, let's get into what happened in Anaheim, and let's start with the positive things that came out of Anaheim, which I think number one among them is the fact that, again, when a lot of this debate is going on, a lot of the messengers are kind of tuning it out. However, they don't tune out Al Mohler. Right? Al Mohler is probably the most prominent name in the SBC and has been for a long time now. And so when he speaks, people are listening to what he's saying. And our friend Brett Baggett got to ask a question of Al Mohler, and it went really, really well. So let's go ahead and play that clip, and then we will respond to it.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. I'm over here to your left. Way over here. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate your hard work at Southern all these years. I especially appreciate your recent episode of The Briefing, during which you made the following helpful and important statement on abortion. Quote, "There are many situations in which it would well seem that agency has been exercised by a woman, and she should be held as complicit in either the death of her unborn child or the effort to secure such a death. The law, in its own way, is capable of making these discernments." End quote. Thank you for that. Now, my question has two parts. One just has to do with you as president of Southern. The second with Southern itself. Part one. What are your thoughts as president of Southern Seminary on abolishing abortion by applying the same homicide code that protects you and me to all image bearers from the moment of fertilization? Second part, what is Southern Seminary teaching in order to equip students to be faithful to Christ in the midst of this abortion holocaust, even by preparing them to minister the gospel at abortion clinics? Dr. Mohler, I just want to make sure that my question is clear. I'm not asking if Southern or you are pro-life, because I believe Southern and you are.
Thank you for that question. Dr. Mueller?
No, I think I understand the question, and it's an interesting time for all these things to be discussed in a different context in our country, because even as Southern Baptists have been meeting here, we've been meeting here with the knowledge that the Supreme Court is, if not while we're here, shortly after we go home, about to release the decision in the Dobbs case, which is likely, we hope and pray, to reverse Roe v. Wade after nearly 50 years of American carnage. So we have to hope and pray that that will happen.
Amen.
The law, as I just said, I didn't mean to bring it up for this reason, but the Moynihan law also prevails here in that politics is downstream from culture, so politics is a matter of negotiation to try according to the law to achieve maximum justice and righteousness. To answer your question specifically, looking at the clock, warned by the president about long-windedness, as I look to the clock, deservedly, Mr. President, as I look to the clock, I simply want to say, I understand what you're asking, and we understand homicide is the death or the killing of a human being, an unborn baby. I believe from the moment of conception to natural death is a human being deserving of that protection. The law has means of making discernments and distinctions in agency, and that means moral responsibility, and in context. How we make that apply in a question of abortion, where even in terms of, say, a miscarriage, things may be difficult sometimes medically to define, I believe the law is capable of making those distinctions. In the same way we have different degrees of murder, we have different kinds of indictments possible in criminal charges. So in other words, I believe that there are many cases in which demonstrably there is not just an abortionist who should face criminal consequences, but a woman seeking an abortion. So that is something that we believe the law should pursue. We also understand that that is not something that is likely to come in all 50 states anytime soon. The moment, for instance, the Dobbs decision comes down, if Roe Roe v. Wade is reversed, it's going to mean a state-by-state battle for the sanctity of human life. And so I am very happy with the law that was just passed and very clearly supported the law just passed in Oklahoma, which calls for a total ban on abortion. I think pro-life states are going to be able to move pretty quickly. And then we've got Illinois, Rhode Island, dare I say California and New York that are so committed to the culture of death on the issue of abortion, they're actually inviting persons to come from pro-life states to California to have abortions that the governor of California says he even wants the state of California to pay for, even talking about paying for transportation. The culture of life and the culture of death will never be more clearly before our eyes than what we're likely to see in coming days if Roe v. Wade is reversed, and we must hope and pray that it is. And at Southern Seminary, we are seeking to raise up ministers of the gospel, missionaries and others who firmly understand what's at stake in the issue of abortion. And right now, we have students who day by day and week by week are on the front lines of this battle, along with faculty, including outside the abortion clinics, bearing witness to life. Mr. President, thank you for the honor of responding.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller.
You got to love old Bringle Brunglehart's question.
Over to your left. Hi. Hi.
You did a good job with that.
That was the best.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely things in there that Al Mohler, we would like to see him, develop on. He said he likes the Oklahoma law. Not a good law, bad law. He did seem to have a kind of pragmatic view of politics, like we're seeking gradually a maximum view of justice. But it is big that he has actually changed his position. He was in support of not punishing the mother, and now he's come on board with saying, no, we actually have to enforce the law across the board. There cannot be unequal weights and measures in this. You have to say that the homicide code applies equally, including any mother that's involved in killing her baby,
Right.
which is that's a big deal.
Yeah, and he made an important clarification, I think, for a lot of the people within the SBC who they hear something like that, like abortion is murder or abortion's homicide, and they just immediately think, oh, these abolitionists are just out to give every woman, the penalty for first-degree murder. And it's like, no, Al Mohler's pointing out, no, there's different degrees, right? And the law is capable of making that discernment, of saying, in this case, this mother is guilty of first-degree murder. She knew what she was doing. She drove to the clinic. She knowingly murdered her child. That's murder. But then in other cases, the law is capable of making the discernment. No, because she was being coerced or whatever reason. There's different facts in this case, and so she's not guilty of murder, or she's not guilty of murder at least in the first degree, or things like that. And so he's making that clarification for all those in the SBC who seem to not understand that. I saw a tweet from Bart Barber, I think back from May, in which he was and Bart Barber, for those who don't know, was just elected president of the SBC, and he said something on Twitter about how there's many women who aren't the ones who pay for the abortion or who aren't the ones who are actually committing the murder. And it's like, sure, that could be a small percentage of abortions, but we're not saying that every woman, no matter the circumstance, will be treated the same. We're saying, as Al Mohler said, the law is capable of discerning which women knew what they were doing and chose to do it of their own volition, and which women did not, or which women did it to a different degree. The law is capable of making that discernment, and that's all we're saying. We're saying make preborn children equal under the law, and then the role of the judicial system, of the courts, of the prosecutors, is to say, okay, what are the facts of this case? What are the mitigating facts? What are the aggravating facts? And what is the appropriate prosecution in this instance? And so that's all we're saying. That's all that the Equal Protection Resolution that we brought to Anaheim was saying. And yeah, to hear something like that from Al Mohler is really, really big. And again, so just some more background and context here for what's going on in Anaheim and in the SBC. There was a bill, which we've talked about on this podcast, in Louisiana earlier this year, that would have abolished abortion, that would have established equal protection, that would have done all these things that we and Mueller are talking about.
Yep.
Now, the ERLC, which is the political arm of the SBC, signed on to an open letter written by National Right to Life opposing that bill, saying we never support any criminal prosecution for the woman in any case. Doesn't matter how many children she's murdered, doesn't matter how much she knew exactly what she was doing, does not matter, no prosecution ever. And that's the position of the ERLC, the political arm.
Is a victim.
Right.
Like, de facto, she is a victim. There's no two ways about it. And they're playing the judge and the jury when they make those kinds of decisions in the way that they're going to pursue policy.
Yep.
But when Al Mohler says that the law is capable of handling it, I think he is referring to the American legal system.
Yep.
But the legal codes, the homicide codes of America are based on the law of God. Like, you have the basis for those discernments in the law of God. And so there's no even compromise there in saying, no, this woman's not going to receive homicide charges because she was clearly forced, or there was some other element in there that would not indicate that she actually was the primary, or she was the main actor involved, or even an actor involved.
Right.
So yeah, the law is capable of making those distinctions, and we should apply it equally so that it can make those distinctions. But when you just sort of say, nope, they're not going to make those, they're just going to say the women are victims no matter what.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect the facts of each case too, because it's most of the time women are going in there and commissioning the murder of their child. They are paying. As Russell says, that no abortionist goes down the street and searches for women to abort their babies. Yeah. They come to him. They pay him money. There's not this element of force in every abortion, although there is exceptions where that is the case, but those are the exceptions.
Right. And it's
not the rule.
And it's a very small minority. And people who say that it's a majority, or that it's anything close to a majority, are really exposing they've never been to an abortion clinic. I've been out there probably hundreds of times in Columbus, in Tacoma, here in Norman, in OKC. I've never once seen an occasion of a man kind of urging the woman into the abortion clinic against her. I've never seen one instance. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It does happen. I'm sure that it happens. Whether it's like 0.5% or maybe a whole 1%. I don't know what it is, but it's very, very small.
Yeah. When that sort of thing does happen, it is one of those things that will make pro-life news, at least. You know, it's one of those things that LifeSite will report on. Some woman was forced into it, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking, when you think of forced abortions, most people just think, the Chinese government does that.
Yeah.
There's that one horrific picture of the woman with a eight-month baby aborted right next to her on the bed that they're putting there to shame her. That's what forced abortion is. Yeah. American women, for the most part, are not in that circumstance. They are willfully going and killing their babies, and the law should say that is something that you deserve punishment for, because it's a teacher, and justice is important, and we should want justice. We shouldn't be people that say, well, let's just be so compassionate that we're going to let murderers off. You don't do that with rape. You don't do that with other cases of murder or theft or anything like that. When it's against you, just showing that you don't care about your neighbor like you care about yourself.
Exactly.
You yearn for justice when somebody wrongs you, but you don't yearn for justice for whatever reason when it's your preborn neighbor. You're not loving them like you love yourself. So stop, reevaluate your position, and love them like you love yourself.
Yep. And one other important point on this subject for any maybe SBC people who are watching who haven't watched our podcast before, to say that the woman is a victim in all cases, and therefore there should be no prosecution ever for any woman who murders her child. To do that is in essence to say that woman has, or every woman has, the right to murder her child. If you are saying women can murder their children without any penalty, you are saying they have the right to murder their child. Legally, that is what you are establishing into law. And the result of that is, sure, the abortionist can't perform the surgical abortion anymore under the cover of law, but that woman can perform her own abortion. And as abortion technology is developing more and more, that's becoming increasingly easy, right? To order those pills straight to your door, no abortionist involved. The woman takes the pills herself. She is the only murderer. Like typically, there's going to be 2 or 3 people who are either the murderer or an accessory to that murder. But in this case, really, you have the woman as the primary murderer, and then maybe the abortion pill company as the accessory. But you have the woman as the primary one who's killing that child, and that is completely legal. She can do that without any fear of any prosecution, no matter how many times she wants to. She can do that as many times as her heart desires. And that's completely covered under the law if we are going to say that the woman shall never face any prosecution. So we cannot do that. We have to abolish abortion. We can't leave that option, that murderous option and soul-destroying option on the table for these women. It's not. It's of course it's incredibly hateful toward that child, and you're not doing the woman any favors by leaving her the option of abortion. Yeah. You think you're being compassionate. Oh, we're being loving toward these women. We're not going to prosecute them, but you're leaving the option for them to murder their child on the table. That's not loving. That's a twisted compassion. Yeah. The justice should the role of the law is to, or one of the roles of the law is to guide people away, is to put the fear of God into people, to make sure people are not choosing to do really evil things. And we can use the law to guide women away from an abortion. And you're not doing that if you're saying she can do it and face no prosecution.
Yeah. And that was a point that I made with a guy at the SBC. A lot of what Free the States was doing at the SBC was handing out pamphlets, telling people about our resolution, trying to get them on board to vote for it if we had to bring it out of committee or whatever the circumstance was. We didn't really know what it was going to look like entirely going into it. But one of the guy that I was talking to was asking about it a little bit, and I said, it is impossible to abolish abortion unless you punish the mother for murdering her babies. Yeah. There's no way that you can possibly abolish abortion. And so we're going to talk about Brent Leatherwood in a little bit, but a lot of these guys who are on the other side will say that we're all on the same team on this, and we're really not. You cannot be for abolishing abortion if you're not for the criminalization of abortion. You cannot say that you actually want to end abortion unless you're for saying it is a criminal offense and you're going to be punished under the law if you do this. And so it's a license to murder in this case. Yep. That was something the guy was talking to. He was just like, oh yeah, wow, I didn't even think about that. And he sort of just changed his thinking on it immediately. But when anyone thinks about this kind of thing logically, there's no case, and it's impossible to come up with an accurate analogy here. There's no case where you would exempt an entire classification of people from a certain charge because they're that class of people. Like, you just don't do that. Yeah. So it really is impossible to apply a consistent, logical framework to anything else. When you're making this case. Yeah. And I don't think they even really try that hard. They just say women victims and pull on people's heartstrings, make them feel bad about something, and then they try to divert them away from what the law of God actually says about it. Yep. And let's get to that, because that is exactly what Brent Leatherwood is about to do. Let's get into Brent Leatherwood a little bit. Brent Leatherwood is the president of the ERLC, which again is the political arm of the SBC, and he is the one who signed the ERLC onto this letter saying no prosecution for any woman who murders her child ever, no matter what the circumstances are. And so when he was giving his report of the ERLC to the whole body of SBC messengers got to ask questions of Brent Leatherwood, and those questions were really, really good. And so we'll watch a few of those, beginning with the first one here, which came from Brian Gunter, who is an SBC pastor in Louisiana, and he was part of helping get that bill to abolish abortion in that state introduced. Yeah. And so let's hear him interact with Brent Leatherwood. Also, one note on Brian Gunter. He was actually last year's, so some of the fruit of what happened last year, Brian Gunter was actually sort of convinced of the abolitionist position last year by both Dusty Devers, our pastor, and by Jeff Durbin. So that was some of the fruit of just going to the convention. So now he's asking questions of the ERLC, critical questions of the ERLC, as fruit of last year's activity at the and helping get a bill. I mean, that bill probably would not, I think for sure, would not have gotten introduced in Louisiana without Brian Gunter. And so again, we're bringing, and that happened again this year. We got connected with new pastors in new states where the abolitionist movement doesn't have a big presence. And so that is the fruit of bringing this resolution, or bringing different abolition resolutions year after year, is we're getting connected with new people. New people are hearing the arguments, are getting connected with other abolitionist pastors. And Brian Gunter is now kind of heading up the effort in Louisiana. Let's listen to him ask Brent Leatherwood what's up about opposing his bill in his work. Yep.
My name is Brian Gunter. I am a messenger and the senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Livingston, Louisiana. Earlier this year, I worked with my state legislators to introduce House Bill 813 in the Louisiana legislature. HB 813 was a bill that sought to immediately end all abortion in my state by providing equal protection to the child in the womb. Simply stated, if life begins at conception, then our laws should protect life from the moment of conception. So you can imagine my surprise when you signed a letter dated May 12th urging all state lawmakers across America to oppose this bill and others like it, because it would make it a crime for a woman to kill her own child by abortion. I thought that Southern Baptists, when we say we're pro-life, we mean that no person should be able to murder an innocent child in the womb. So this is my question. Is it really your position that the mother who willfully kills her own child by abortion is never guilty before God, and she should never face any consequences under the law?
Here's the deal. We agree on the bottom line. We want abortion ended. We want it ended today. We want it ended tomorrow. We want to end it as soon as humanly possible. But while we hold fast to that goal and continually shout, that is what we want, why not support legislation that promises to save one more life in any context? I will say this, to get the record straight, no letter was sent directly to Louisiana about a Louisiana piece of legislation. Right after the draft opinion from the Supreme Court was leaked, National Right to Life approached us, as well as 75 other pro-life organizations from around the country, to say, hey, this would make sense, since functionally, if this were to be law, or this were to be the final decision, abortion will be returned to the states. It would seem to make sense that we send a letter to legislative leaders in all 50 states to let them know what the principles of the pro-life movement are. And so in a state like California, for example, where we are, it makes sense to send that because they're going to have this issue right in front of them. And in a state like California, they're going to have to take any available win where they can. Here's the reality. You're not going to get me to say that I want to throw mothers behind bars. That's not the view of this entity. That is not the view of this convention. It is not the view of the pro-life movement. That was proven yet again today. I believe the same principles that Jesus used in John 4 and John 8 apply right here. Maybe instead of rushing in like a mob, we instead rush in with the truth given to us by the author of life, showing we are able to bear the burdens of others and offer the healing that comes with grace, just as has been poured out for us.
So here we have an SBC pastor saying, Brent, me and other pastors in my state are working, shedding blood, sweat, and tears, trying to abolish abortion in our state, and you come and oppose the work that we are doing. You sign this open letter that is released on May 12th, the very day of the vote on our bill to abolish abortion that we helped get introduced, that I helped get introduced. And you're going to come and work against us. What gives? And Brent's response, oh, this open letter had nothing to do with the bill in Louisiana. Yeah, right. It had everything to do with the bill in Louisiana. And
released on the same day.
On the very day of the vote. Now, Brent was not heading up the efforts to write this letter and get people on it. So maybe he doesn't know that. He'd have to be pretty dang ignorant, but maybe that's possible. But in any case, it's very, very clear that the reason National Right to Life was doing this was not because of Roe v. Wade possibly being overturned. That's not a reason to address this particular issue. The reason they addressed this particular issue to say that women should never be prosecuted is because there was a bill that passed through committee that was making national headlines everywhere that would have made abortion homicide. That is clearly, obviously why the letter was written. It had nothing to do with Roe versus Wade. And so for him I doubt he's actually ignorant enough to think that this bill did not have to do with, or that this open letter did not have to do with Louisiana. But in any case, it obviously did. So it's very disingenuous or very ignorant, one of the two, for him to say that it had nothing to do with Louisiana. Yeah. He was clearly opposing Brian's efforts. That's very, very annoying that he would be disingenuous like that.
Yeah, and you're not going to get me to say that I want to throw mothers behind bars. Like, okay, well, you could just support equal protection. How about that? None of us are saying we want to go throw mothers behind bars.
My mom is a mother. I don't want her being thrown behind bars. Who's throwing mothers behind bars? Yeah. Who's doing that? Let's track those people down and call them extremist mobs and like oppose them and stuff.
Yeah,
who's doing that?
And that kind of like media spin type thing too. Like you're using that word mother really loosely. You know, if you're talking about somebody who's commissioning the murder of their own child, and you're trying to drum up sympathy by saying, oh, you want to throw mothers behind bars, like making you think of your own mom type stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
no, this person's trying to kill their own baby. Like, that's a level of depraved that really should astound and shock people.
Yeah.
That is a crazy thing that a lot of mothers, 1/3 of all women in America right now, have killed their own babies, have commissioned the murder of their own babies. That is a child sacrifice epidemic that we have on our hands. And you're trying to drum up sympathy for them by saying that they're mothers. Like, we're going to throw mothers behind bars. We're talking about murderers. We're talking about women and men that commission the murder of their babies. And you can't find the guts or the spine to say, yes, women who murder their babies should be put in prison. Why? Why? Because it's a political talking point. Because you're using the lines of the left, really, and trying to fearmonger to make it seem like we hate women or something like that. There's nothing to do with hating women. It has to do with loving women, loving the preborn women who are murdered in their mother's womb, the preborn children who are murdered in their mother's womb. That's a loving response to say, yes, you get justice just like everybody else. Everyone who murders a person should be punished under law for it. That's what the law of God says. That's what's just. But you totally go against justice by trying to make it about something that it isn't. No one is out there bloodthirsty for women to be thrown in jail. We're saying the same laws that apply to you, if your mom tried to kill you, Brent, should be applied to this situation. And the only reason you would oppose that is because you do not view your preborn neighbor as yourself. You're not applying the same standards of justice that you would apply to yourself. You are being hateful. You're being a bigot. You're hating your preborn neighbor when you do this. I don't think you realize that, but you're not affording to them the same standard that you would afford to yourself. That's disgusting. That's bigotry. And you need to repent of that. We actually had a conversation with Brent Leatherwood after their ERLC thing, and he was trying to tell us, oh, we're on the same side. And Clay Hall, who was standing there having the conversation with him for the most part, said, oh, just like in Indiana or in Louisiana. Yeah. And he kind of just didn't want to really respond to it. But you were opposing us then. We're not on the same side. You are not on our team. You are not our friend in this.
Yeah.
You are opposing Christians trying to faithfully apply the word of God to our laws, and you're opposing it. You're saying that is not good.
Yeah.
You are calling God not good. That's what you're doing.
Yep.
You're saying that his standard isn't good, his justice isn't good, you don't agree with it, and your standard, Brent, is better. And that is gross. And people should very much call for you to resign and to not be a part of anything involved with ethics, if that's your position on things.
Yeah.
It's really despicable.
And that's how he began his response to Brian actually as well. He said, Brian, I'm with you. Let's end abortion immediately. Let's end it tomorrow. Let's end it as soon as humanly possible. Right? But again, the bill to do that, he opposed. And he'll say, oh, I wasn't actually opposing it. I was just saying something generally. Mm-hmm. No, that letter was clearly in response to Louisiana. And again, as we talked about, as we were discussing the things that Al Mohler said, you can't actually end abortion. Brent Leatherwood said, I want to end abortion with you. But you can't end abortion if moms can murder their children without any penalty. Mm-hmm. Abortion isn't ended. If they can murder children with no penalty, abortion has not been ended. It has not been abolished. Mm-hmm. And so one other line he said that I want to really hone in on. Maybe instead of rushing in like a mob, instead we should rush in with the truth. So again, these people who are saying that the law should apply equally to born people and preborn people, they're rushing in like a mob. Mm-hmm. These people are a mob trying to condemn these innocent victims of abortion. It's insane. It's emotional manipulation. It's insane. And Brent, stop doing that. That is insane.
And I would love for Brent to give his definition of what the truth is, because he's here telling women that they're victims of the murder of their own babies.
Yeah.
What truth exactly do you have? What gospel exactly do you preach to these women? If you think women who murder their babies are victims, how are you telling them that they're a sinner in this case? Where is the guilt coming from on the part of these women? These women who are racked with guilt for years on end, some of them aren't, but a lot of them are. What do you say to them? You're not guilty, you're a victim. That's not the gospel to these women. The gospel to these women are, yes, you feel guilty because the image of God is as imprinted on you as it was on your child who you murdered. And that's why you feel guilty. The law of God is convicting your heart, and you need to repent, admit that you're a murderer, cry out to God for forgiveness, and trust on his son to forgive you of your sin. That's the gospel being applied to this situation. But Brent has no gospel to give them. He cannot give them a gospel. He has ruled it out at the outset. There's no way that Brent can consistently preach the gospel to these women because he doesn't even view them as murderers.
Right. But Brent and others involved, such as Elizabeth Graham, who we're going to get to later, they often talk about we need to show grace to these women. And that's what something the pro-life movement talks about a lot. We need to show grace to these women. But grace is for people who have committed wrong, and then you show grace to those people. So the fact that they even say we have to show grace to these women shows that Brent and Elizabeth and these people, they know that it is a sin, not just on the part of the abortionist, but on the part of the mother. Mm-hmm. She's not just an innocent victim in all this, and they know that, and they betray that with the way that they speak about this, about how we need to show them grace. And so, again, there's plenty of room for courts making individual discernments and saying this woman should be shown a degree of grace, this woman over here is guilty completely. But they're, again, ruling all of that out, saying, no, they're all victims. None of them have committed any sin. Let's just show grace. But then again, the grace doesn't make any sense if they haven't sinned. And so that contradiction really is exposing that they don't really understand what they're even talking about.
And even taking it a step further than that, there have been, I can't remember the name of the serial killer, but there was a serial killer on death row, and he was preached the gospel to, and he became a Christian in jail. Now, I believe that man is my brother in Christ. Like that, if he actually did accept Christ, then even though he's a murderer who killed many different people on death row, that he is my brother in Christ. But that does not mean the civil penalties for what he did gets him out of jail.
Right.
Like, you've got a really twisted view of grace here if you think that the civil magistrate should not administer their duty to punish evildoers because of the gospel. The gospel can save them from both the penalty of their sin and the effects of their sin. It can transform them and change them. But that doesn't mean the civil magistrate backs off and does not give them justice. The civil magistrate should administer justice. That is their job. And so even though we believe that eternally they're going to be in heaven someday with us if they've repented and put their faith in Christ, that does not mean the penalties from the civil magistrate are void. They're still there. They're in place. That sentence is going to be carried out. And no one in Brent's case or anyone else would say, yep, this serial killer has changed their life. They've changed their mind. They're a Christian now. So let's get them off of death row, or let's get them out of jail entirely. No one thinks that way, because it's not just about rehabilitation. It's not just about even the teaching effects of the murder codes now. It's about justice, and justice has to be served here on earth. There are victims of that man who he killed, and it was an offense to God, and God demands that the civil magistrate act justly, even if God can and does forgive people in that situation. So it's a really twisted view of grace that he's talking about here. It's not grace. It's cheap, and it's totally devoid of what the gospel says about people. It doesn't say that you're off of all penalties. The thief on the cross was still on the cross, but he went to be with Christ in paradise. And there is no indication from Scripture that that was a wrong thing. Like, that actually is the penalty from the civil magistrate that it administers, and it should administer. That's the function it's supposed to serve.
Right.
Not endorsing crucifixion here or anything. But
Right. So that was the interaction between Pastor Brian Gunter from Louisiana and Brent Leatherwood. Let's get on to another interaction here. Pastor Paul Thompson from Idaho. This is another really good one, so let's take a look at this.
My name is Paul Thompson. I pastor the Eastside Baptist Church in Twin Falls, Idaho. In the state of Idaho, over 1,600 preborn children will be dismantled, ripped, sucked, chemically burned through induced abortions, with or without a Roe decision. Of those 1,600 who will be murdered in my state, 287 of them happen in my city, the city of Twin Falls, Idaho, where they are murdered. My question to you is direct, and I desire a direct answer. My question is, in November of 2022, I'm running for Idaho Senate because no one in my city and few in my state will stand for the preborn. So I'm running for this office asking the citizens of the state of Idaho to appoint me to the state Senate. And I'm asking you, will you please not write letters to the state of Idaho to reduce the efforts and to eliminate the opportunity that we could speak for the preborn, and that not mothers, but that murderers can no longer murder children in my state?
I think, as you have seen here today, our heart is for life. And I don't think that anybody in good faith can contest that. The reality is, we're going to continue speaking for life just in the same ways that we always have. We want to make sure that it is illegal. We want abortion banned. And so we would join with you in that effort. But we also want to make it unthinkable and unnecessary. And we use that language. That's very purposeful language that we use. We use illegal because that speaks for the child. We want it to be illegal to take the life of a preborn child. So we use that term. We are asking for the government to step in and save the life of that child. We use unnecessary because that's speaking to these mothers where they are. They are continually messaged by Planned Parenthood and the predatory abortion industry that preys upon them and sells them lie after lie after lie. And we want to offer them a different way. And we also use the word unthinkable. And that word has been used for ages now by the SBC. We use the word unthinkable because we want to cast a vision for the culture, calling the culture to a better way to truly establish a culture of life. So, brother, let me hear me say this. I am thankful that you are stepping up to serve the citizens of your state. Good luck with that. And we will be there with you to save lives, serve mothers, and ban abortion and go after the abortion industry.
Just from the very start, does not answer the question at all.
Yeah.
He is not going to promise Paul Thompson that he won't oppose Paul's efforts to abolish abortion in Idaho.
And Paul asked very specifically, he said, Mr. President, I'm asking very directly, and I would like a very direct answer.
Yeah.
Will you promise me that you will not write another letter opposing my efforts to abolish abortion in my state? And what does the letter would do? Goes on for 2 or 3 minutes about how we need to make abortion unnecessary and unthinkable and illegal and all this stuff, and will not give him a direct yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Now, we know what the answer is. He's probably going to continue opposing Paul, but he doesn't want to say that.
Yeah. And, abolitionists get a bad rap for calling people names or whatever. And I hope people can understand why someone would call a person like Brent a snake, because it's just so slithery and deceptive and political, and he just does not answer the question at all. The dude is a snake. Like, yes, I am planning on opposing your efforts, but here I am in front of this big audience, and I'm going to say I'm thankful for what you're doing.
And we're all on the same team.
No, you're not. You're not thankful for what he's doing. You're not thankful that he's going to propose an abolition bill if he gets elected. You don't like that. And we know you don't like that because you sign letters saying that you don't like that, and that you speak for the SBC when you say that you don't want equal protection for the preborn. So stop being a snake and just admit it like a man. Man up, stop being a coward, and say, yes, I would like to oppose your bill as soon as it happens, because that's what you did in Idaho. As soon as you saw that there was a chance that a bill was going to make it through, it made it through committee, and you had some degree of confidence that it was actually going to be put into law, you spoke out and you opposed it. So don't stop pretending. It's just gross, it's ridiculous, and it's not befitting of a Christian man. And abolitionists are right to say that you are a snake and a coward, and you should not have any measure of authority whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, he should be removed. He should resign, or if he doesn't resign, then the ERLC should remove him from this, because no one who is going to oppose abolition bills should have any authority whatsoever, especially in a Christian denomination, a professingly conservative anti-abortion denomination. Mm-hmm. This is a major, major problem, and until the church and the leaders who we are looking to provide leadership on ethical issues stop doing this, we're going to have mothers murdering their children. Mm-hmm. And so this is very, very serious. And so Brent and those who support Brent and agree with Brent on this, please hear us on that.
Yeah. And it is interesting when he says our heart is for life.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to read too much into this, but I think that a lot of the times the reason a lot of these pro-life talking heads use euphemisms like for life is because it becomes a lot more personal when you say things like our preborn neighbors or preborn babies or things like that. And you don't euphemize it. You don't say just for life. Your heart really isn't for the preborn. You are not treating them like your neighbor. You are treating them with a different standard, a different measuring stick from God's word.
Yeah.
Your heart is not for the preborn. So if it's for life, maybe your own life, but it's definitely not for the life of your preborn neighbors. You're not treating them the way that you would treat your son or your daughter or yourself. So it's just gross euphemisms, and you're really not. You're speaking against it, and any opportunity that you have that you think that we might be able to protect the right to life equally.
Yeah. So that is the interaction between Brent Leatherwood and Paul Thompson from Idaho. Let's move on to the next interaction here between Brent Leatherwood and another messenger from the SBC.
Thank you. I'm Wes Brown, pastor of First Baptist Plummerville in Plummerville, Arkansas. The previous speaker rightly referred to a willful abortion as a sin. My question is it a sin before God by the mother who willfully participates in it? And if so, which law of God did she break?
The 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill.
All right, so Kevin Smith, who you saw come up and answer the question there, he is on the board, I believe, of the ERLC, and his answer, of course, is the correct answer. So he says, yes, it's murder. It's violating the sixth commandment of the 10 Commandments, you shall not murder. And that's correct, but that he kind of gestures to the messengers as if like, what the heck are we asking this question for? Of course, it's a sixth commandment violation. But the really telling thing is, he had to come up to the mic and answer that.
Yeah.
Brent Leatherwood couldn't just stand right up to the mic and say, it is murder. It is a violation of the sixth commandment.
Yeah.
He couldn't say that.
And it's interesting that was a laugh line there, the SBC, because he goes, he like acts like it's a stupid question or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just, it's really interesting that they don't see the irony in all of it. Like, yeah, it's a sixth commandment violation. You guys aren't acting like it. Like, be consistent. They're saying she's not guilty of a sixth commandment violation. They're saying she's a victim.
Yeah.
So,
or Brent Leatherwood in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the ERLC was
and
represented by it. So,
right. Yeah, it's true, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're part of that organization, then you are signing on to that letter just by virtue of working there. So, it is incredible that they can act like it's obvious and just kind of laugh it off while completely ignoring the consistency of their position, the consistency that we were trying to bring them to the entire time. Like question after question after question. Why aren't you for equal protection? Why did you sign this letter? Why are you opposing the laws be applied to your preborn neighbors? And then the question comes up, is it murder? Yeah, obviously it's murder. Okay, then be consistent.
And even murder on the part of the mother, because the question that was asked, he wasn't even asking, is abortion generally murder? He was asking, in an abortion, what law of God has the mother broken?
Yeah.
And so there it is. Kevin Smith saying the mother has broken the sixth commandment. Mm-hmm. She has committed murder. Kevin Smith is saying that. But again, as you mentioned, his organization that he's on the board of, the guy sitting right next to him, Brent Leatherwood, signed a letter saying she is a victim. If she's a victim, she has not violated the sixth commandment.
Yeah.
So there's an obvious contradiction. You can't just pretend, what a dumb question. Yeah. Yeah, this is it. Kevin Smith is right. This is a sixth commandment violation, and that invalidates everything else the ERLC has said on the subject. Mm-hmm. It was a great question. I'm so glad that our brother from Arkansas, I believe, yeah, it was a really good question. It was not a dumb question. Kevin Smith tried to make him kind of feel stupid for asking it, but it was an excellent question, and it exposed their inconsistency and hypocrisy on this issue.
Yeah, and if they were being consistent, they would have said no, they were preyed on by Planned Parenthood because they lied to them, and they're so good at lying, and women are so stupid that they just cannot understand that they have a baby in their womb, even though they can literally see into the womb, something no other generation in the history of the world has ever been able to do. They're just too stupid to know all that stuff. Yeah. But, of course, we always have known that the preborn are human beings. We did not need any scientific discoveries nowadays to know that the preborn are human beings.
Yep.
But we literally have a window into the womb, And you're saying that women are too stupid to see past Planned Parenthood's lies? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yep. Really, really crazy. So let's get on to the final ERLC question here, which came from Jared Moore. So let's watch that real quick.
Brent, I'm Jared Moore, messenger from Cumberland Homesteads Baptist Church. And I have a question about your slogan for Stand for Life, making abortion unnecessary. If you believe that abortion is a violation of thou shalt not murder, then you're saying making murder unnecessary, which implies that it's necessary. I think you should change it. If a mother sees that, she's going to think it's necessary. Unless she talks to y'all, it could cost babies' lives.
All right, thank you. Would you like to speak to that?
Thank you for that, Jared. I did touch on this in my previous answer, but actually, I'm going to let you hear from my colleague, Elizabeth Graham, who has done an incredible job. Let me just take a moment to say this. She's done an incredible job as our VP of Life Initiatives. Dr. Moore, when he was president, gave her a very tough assignment. He wanted to make sure that all of our life initiatives were housed under one office, and she has stepped up to lead so well, and she is leading our Stand for Life efforts, and she is going to respond more directly to you, Mr. Jared.
Jared, I think you said you're at microphone 8. I can't really see you out there, but thank you for that question. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the fact that we have the incredible privilege of partnering with other like-minded organizations through a Collective Impact Alliance. And so as a part of our Collective Impact Alliance work, for the last 5 years, the ERLC has been the lead on church engagement for this work. It's 12 national pro-life organizations and ministries that work in various areas of the pro-life movement, representing adoption and foster care, baby rescue and intervention, legal and legislative. And we also, once a year, bring together a large group of pro-life organizations for that as well. And there's 100 ministries that are participating in that annually. And as a part of that work, we together have launched this initiative called Stand for Life. And the goal of Stand for Life for the conference and the agreed upon language is that we want to see, one, abortion illegal, which we discussed earlier. We want to see abortion unthinkable through seeing hearts, minds, attitudes, and behaviors changed through discipleship and curriculum in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And third, we want to address the underlying systemic drivers for why women find themselves in a position that they feel that they have no other option but to seek abortion. And so there are many things being worked on, but this was the call to action agreed upon by all organizations for that tagline. So we will do some work on behalf of Southern Baptists to advocate to include unthinkable and unnecessary. We heard the concerns. We have already made an adjustment, and I appreciate you sharing that with me directly and having the opportunity to respond to you.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the really annoying things here, Sam, that you talked about earlier that Brent Leatherwood did that we just saw from Elizabeth Graham as well, is this, I was asked a question, and I'm going to take this opportunity to go on for 2 minutes about our amazing program and how there's 100 participating other organizations, and our program is so great, and here's, just this, everything that gets asked of them, it's an opportunity to talk about the programs they're working on and kind of just advertise those to everybody instead of answering the question directly. Now, she got to the question a little bit, very, very briefly at the very end of that whole stump speech for their programs.
And she didn't give a clear answer about what's going to happen to that language, too. But it sounds like that was a pre-scripted thing, and they're just like, well, let's just have any question come up. And then I'm going to give you this kind of glowing introduction, and you're going to come in and give this little stump speech. And wow, it was impressive. She kind of managed to sort of tie it in, but it was like, this doesn't have anything to do with the question. You guys are accountable to those messengers, and they're here asking you questions, and you are giving evasive answers. That should trouble people. That should make your skin crawl. You're supposed to be able to answer questions about what you're doing as an organization when you are an SBC organization, and the messengers at that meeting are there because at this portion of the meeting because they're trying to ask questions of the ERLC. This is why there's votes to get them disbanded, to remove them, to abolish the ERLC. Because of stuff like this and because of a lot of the other things they do, no one wants an organization like this where they can't even be accountable to the people that fund them, the churches that fund them. You're sitting there in front of a group of churches that are giving you money and you're evading questions. And I just think it's really gross. But beyond that, though, the unnecessary thing, it was a really good question. Like just to frame it in such a way, if someone were to say, let's make rape unnecessary, you would be repulsed by it. You would think, what on earth are you talking about? Rape is not necessary. And then someone's like, well, there's so many men out there who are deprived of sexual interactions or something like that, and so they need to take it out in an unhealthy way. No, like that's not the way that it works. If it's a violation of the law of God, it is never necessary. And it's such a faithless thing to think we've got to do the Stand for Life thing and come in and provide resources for all these women because God's not going to provide for them if they choose not to murder their baby. That's faithless. Like God says that he clothes the lilies of the field and you should not worry. And so if you are a person who is following after God, God is going to care for you whether or not that means your physical destruction in this life or whether it means God actually provides resources for you. But whatever you do, you're not supposed to violate the laws of God. Like Job had everything taken from him. All of his children died. All of that happened. But God was still caring for him, providing for him. He was still there. And so it's so faithless to think it was necessary for people to murder their babies because of lack of resources or something like that.
Right. And that's not to say that providing resources to people who need it is a bad thing. That's a good thing. But again, the problem is with the phrasing, make abortion unnecessary, which necessarily implies that it currently is necessary in many cases. And that is, as Jared Moore pointed out, an awful implication to make, and an inescapable implication. And she didn't really answer his question very directly, but they're really, and that's for good reason, because there's no way around it. If it has to be made unnecessary, you're saying it currently is, at least in some cases, which is absolutely false. And I hope they wouldn't say that as clearly. I hope they would never say it actually is necessary for a woman to do this. But they have said it in essence by what they're implying with the slogan of this big conference with 100 participating organizations. That's what they are saying in between the lines of the name of their own conference.
It really is troubling to have them defending this kind of language. And it kind of seems like they're changing it towards the end. Like, we've heard your concerns, but then she reiterates it. She says, and we're going to work to make abortion unnecessary and unthinkable. Like, that's her sort of closing line as she leaves. But while giving the impression that they've heard criticism and they're going to make adjustments or whatever. And so I wonder if their adjustments are they're going to continue to say unthinkable and unnecessary, which does not get to the heart of anything. But you shouldn't be saying the tagline again and then acting like you're fixing the rhetoric. You're not. Don't use that phrase at all. It's a dumb phrase that you shouldn't be using. And it really makes you guys seem kind of pro-abort and crazy. Like you actually think there's some kind of necessary component to abortion being legal. There isn't. So
really, really bad.
Yeah.
And people might say that's a harsh criticism, but again, that is necessarily inescapably implied by what they have named their conference. And so, really, really bad. But what's good is that we had messengers at the mics. Two of them, I don't actually know Wes Brown or Jared Moore. I haven't even met them before. So it was really cool to see them at the mic asking kind of abolitionist-minded questions. But anyway, it was really great to see Al Mohler's response, and it was really great that we got to ask questions of the ERLC. So that was...
Yeah, and just one more point on the unnecessary thing. I think if Dobbs comes out in favor of the pro-life position that states can regulate abortion to any degree that they want. They can get rid of it or whatever. The distinctions between the modern pro-life movement and the pro-abortion movement are really going to start to disappear, because they've got a bunch of people who are saying basically a mother has a right to murder their baby. Not in those words, but they're saying basically they do have a right to murder their baby because they're never going to face punishments. And they sort of have this same rhetoric of unnecessary already. Like it's almost like the Bill Clinton era type, safe, legal, and rare type stuff. It is like this weird, I think there's a lot of commonality in those two views. You've got people saying abortion is necessary by implication, and people saying that abortion is a human right. And once Dobbs is no longer, like once the Supreme Court is no longer an obstacle, you're going to just have them all lumped together in a lot of ways.
At least as it relates to how they are going to posture themselves in regard to abolition bills. Yeah, absolutely. They're gonna be on the same team there.
Yeah.
Saying abortion is necessary for women who are poor and they don't have enough help and all this stuff.
Well, one side is saying that a doctor can kill your baby, and the other side, and you can kill your baby, and the other side is saying only you can kill your baby.
Right.
So not a whole lot of differences there.
Yep.
Pretty much the exact same thing. And you guys should think about that pretty seriously. It's not more compassionate to say you care about the baby that's being killed while allowing them to be killed.
Yep.
If every pro-abort on earth said, I care about the baby who I'm about to murder, doesn't really help at all. So,
Yep. So that was a lot of the good things that happened. We got Al Mohler to talk about equal protection in front of the whole convention in a way that was extremely, extremely helpful to the cause of justice for preborn children. And we got a bunch of abolitionist pastors, including two, like Jared Moore and Wes Brown. I haven't met those guys before. And so to see them at the mics asking questions kind of from an equal protection perspective was really, really great, in addition to Paul Thompson and Brian Gunter. So that was the good stuff. And now we're going to get to some of the not good stuff that happened in Anaheim.
Yep.
And so as we get to that, let's begin with what happened to the resolution on equal protection for preborn children. So this is a resolution that the SBC pastors put together, basically saying abortion is murder. It is homicide. It is the intentional killing of an image bearer of God. And as such, the laws that protect you and me and everyone here in the convention need to protect those preborn children equally. The same laws should apply, the same protections should apply, and we cannot give certain people special murder rights to kill their own children. Abortion should be homicide. And so there's this resolution to do that, and then the resolutions committee wrote their own resolution about abortion and about how Roe's about to be overturned and things like that.
And yay for the ERLC.
And yeah, the ERLC, we commend the ERLC for their excellent work on the front lines of the pro-life movement. And we commend incrementalism for helping to bring about, the possible overturning of Roe and all this really, really stupid stuff. And the committee went with that resolution instead of the resolution saying that preborn children should be made equal under law.
Just the silliness of that too should be pointed out. It just seems like you're, just giving yourself a gigantic pat on the back, because seems like there's a ton of overlap as far as the resolutions committee goes, or like staffers within the ERLC. You've got an organization that is, people are on staff, sort of working for the ERLC, and the resolutions committee that are, representing the ERLC in a lot of ways, and they're just giving themselves a pat on the back. Like, let's put this before our messengers to see whether they want to pat us too.
Yeah.
It's so dumb.
Yeah.
So dumb.
Yep.
As if the ERLC had a dang thing to do with anything. Like, irrelevant. Irrelevant as irrelevant gets.
Yep. And except for when it comes to implying to a large number of Christians that abortion might be necessary in some cases, and that women should be able to murder their children without any prosecution. They're very helpful when it comes to those things. But when it comes to abolishing abortion, as you said, not a very helpful entity. And so we have this resolution commending the ERLC, commending incrementalism, that is brought out of committee instead of the one saying preborn children should be made equal. And what happened is very, very frustrating because, and I think it's very telling of their lack of confidence in their position. But let's actually, instead of me describing it, let's just play for all of our listeners what happened.
The chair recognizes Dana McCain.
Good evening. My name is Dana McCain, and I'm a messenger from First Baptist Church of Dothan, Alabama. I move that the convention adopt resolution number 7 on anticipation of an historic moment in the pro-life movement.
All right, we receive. The question is, On resolution number 7. Are you 6A? Are you to speak for this resolution?
Rob Collingsworth, messenger from Redemption Story Church in Fort Worth, Texas. Mr. Chair, I move the previous question.
Is there a second? Messenger, do you wish to speak for this amendment before you move?
No, Mr. Chair, I do not.
Okay. Well, you punched the button that said you did. That's why I was kind of under the impression you wanted to.
I think I might have gotten out of order.
That's all right. That's all right.
So, can I call the question?
We are concerned on the platform because we do not wish to for the debate to appear like there's anyone out there who's trying to fast track any of these resolutions without debating on them. So we recognize 6A first because he was first in order at the top to speak for the motion. The messenger, he can be for the motion and move the previous question, or he could have been against the motion and moved the previous question. But it's the messenger's choice. But we recognized him first because he was first in the priority. He's moved the previous question. Now, you have a chance to decide right now if you're all sold on the resolution and you want to go ahead and vote it yes or no now, you may do that. But if you would like to hear some debate on the resolution, then vote no. But it's in the power of the messenger. So the messengers get to decide right now, do you want to proceed, close debate and proceed, or do you want to hear debate? That's the question the chair is going to put to you.
All right. All those in favor of closing debate, would you please raise your ballot? All right. Those opposed to closing debate, would you please raise your ballot? All right, it's 2/3 in the affirmative, and you are ready to look at resolution number 7. Excuse me? Thank you. If you're in favor of resolution number 7, will you hold up your ballot, please? Thank you. You may put that down. If you are opposed to resolution number 7, would you please hold up your ballots? Resolution number 7 is adopted.
So that is what happened when it came time for the pro-life incrementalists to maybe speak in defense of their pro-life incrementalism, to speak in defense of their commending the ERLC. What did they do? Call the question without any debate. And the parliamentarian came up to the microphone and said, I know this looks kind of sketchy that we're just calling the question without any debate, but it's this messenger's opinion that we should call the question, and so that's what the vote is going to have to be. And so he's kind of acknowledging it looks sketchy, and yeah, it is really, really lame and cowardly that Rob Collingsworth stepped up to the mic and did not want to have to defend equal protection, or his opposition to equal protection, did not want to have to defend incrementalism or the commending of the ERLC before everybody. And what's even more, he was even asked by Ed Litton, who's the chair of the convention, who's the president of the SBC, the chair of the meeting, and he said, brother, would you like to speak to your motion to skip debate? And he goes, no, sir, I would not. So he didn't want to speak about the resolution. He didn't even want to speak about his reasons for skipping debate. They can't touch this, right? Because they can't oppose equal protection, right? We're saying all children should be equal under law. We are saying the ERLC should not be commended for opposing a bill to make preborn children equal under law. He knows he can't defend that. If you were to go up there and say something like, yes, I'm calling the question because I don't want to have to debate our commendations of the ERLC who's opposing a bill to abolish abortion, or I don't want to. I want to call the question so we don't have to debate equal protection for preborn children. Of course, he would look very, very stupid and foolish, and so he can't. He doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Doesn't want to say a word. He just wants to call the question and debate, not let any discussion about these important issues be had in front of the messengers. Now, this was obviously very, very, very frustrating, and it looked sketch, and it was sketch. Now, we got that discussion going in other ways, again, as we played earlier in this episode, with the questions of the SBC university presidents and of the questions of the ERLC. So we still got the discussion in front of people, and by as you mentioned earlier, by handing out pamphlets to people. So we forced the discussion in other ways, but here, in every chance that they get, they want to shut down discussion. They don't want to have to defend their own position.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say it with 100% certainty, but this is so sketchy, even they're acknowledging it. This is so sketchy that it seems like this guy was a plant by the resolutions committee. It seems like they just sort of orchestrated this situation. And obviously they already made it hard for abolitionists this year because they stuck it at the end of the day, at the last day. A lot of people were not even in the room anymore. A lot of people had left. They had to get on planes and no longer were even in the room. Yeah. But it looks very orchestrated, and you can tell that they think it looks very orchestrated because they're saying, "Oh, we don't want this to look orchestrated or anything like that." Yeah. But he even mentions there. He says, "Like I may have gotten out of order."
Right, because Ed Litton says you pressed the button that said you wanted to testify about this resolution. Yeah. And then whatever his name was, Rob Collingsworth said, "Oh, that I may have been out of order," like saying it may have been the previous guy who actually pushed the button who actually wanted to give testimony. Yeah. And so, I mean, it looks possible that he was called and he shouldn't have been the one that was called on. Yeah. So that we can't say that for sure, but it looks sketchy, and they know it looks sketchy, and they're trying to make it not look sketchy. Yeah.
I don't have a full story on this, but there was a lot of people that were with us at the mics. There's probably 30 or 40 people that were there just specifically to speak about abolition, and they were on every single mic looking to ask a question or something like that. Yeah. And someone had said something along the lines of like they were actually in line before this guy, so and he got pushed up to the front. So it is really sketchy that this happened, and they were doing sketchy things the entire time. Like they had made it a difficult thing for us to even get a resolution, and it was impossible for us to do what we did last year because they changed the whole order of things so that you couldn't even ask for your bill to be brought out of committee. And so, and then they had people immediately vote on that, and the way that they framed that was very like against what we were saying. Basically, the parliamentarian was saying something along the lines of, if you want people to come up here and pull resolutions whenever they want, then vote for this. And it just made it seem like, oh, yeah, I don't want people disrupting the meeting the whole time, so I'm going to vote against it. You would not think that they would be trying to spin it like that if they were actually being what they were supposed to be, objective sort of people to push the meeting along, where they're not really in control. They're just trying to provide a structure for all this mass of people. But, yeah, the Resolutions Committee really came out swinging against abolition this year, and I think they did all kinds of sketchy things on this one. Yeah, and it really is frustrating to have the question called on the very first one. No opposition is able to speak at all to it, just calling for the question immediately. Like, what are you scared of? Why wouldn't you just have some objections be heard so that people can actually know what's going on? Like, I understand there are strategic times when people want to call the question. That's fine, but at least let some debate be given to it. Yeah. This was not even debated. This wasn't even spoken positively. They didn't even speak positively to this thing. People were just, pro-life, and then they called the question like that. And so it is really a nasty way of going about this when we want our objections to be heard. There's a good amount of people in the room who have big problems with this, and they're just going to call the question like that's not important at all.
Yep, I totally agree. It's a very cowardly way of going about having this abolition versus incremental debate, and it's really what we've seen for a long time. You know, our friend C.R. Calley has been trying to get a pro-life incrementalist to debate him about abolition or about the criminalization of abortion for a long time, for years, and no one will debate him. I think he got one debate opponent on one occasion, but it wasn't even a very prominent leader in the pro-life movement. I think it was just a random pro-life guy. The leaders will not engage. on this issue.
Samuel say engaged a little bit, not on equal protection, but
right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I guess that's one good example is when Samuel Say did agree to come on his podcast. But for the most part, the pro-life leaders won't engage on abolition versus incrementalism and equal protection versus the mother should not face any prosecution. They're not willing to engage, and there's a good reason for that.
Yeah.
They don't have a very defensible position, and they know it.
Yeah.
They can't speak to why they oppose it with any confidence. They can't even speak to why they're trying to shut down debate with any confidence.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very telling of their position.
Yeah. And again, I wish it was recorded, but Dusty and Clay Hall both had a chance to debate with Leatherwood. It wasn't televised or anything. There was no filming of anything like that. It was just a private conversation, and it was really interesting to watch because it is just so lame. Like, it is so dumb. Not even trying to be biblically faithful, logical, anything like that. It is just a bad argument that these pro-life leaders make, and I don't think that they never want to be put under the microscope for any of that stuff because it only ends poorly for them. When you're wrong and you know you're wrong, you're not going to debate. People who debate are people that are confident that they're right.
Yeah.
And even pro-aborts are more confident that they're right than pro-lifers are about how we should accurately respond to abortion.
Yeah.
Pro-aborts are way more willing to debate their position than pro-lifers are. They just shut it down and they walk away, and they get all political speak about it. Like they get evasive and tricky and maneuvering and that sort of thing, but they never actually get down to it and make clear statements about what they believe.
Yeah. And so one other example of that, what you just talked about kind of evading the question and just kind of talking about what they want to talk about. Prior to Al Mohler being asked by Brett Baggett about equal protection, there were two other SBC presidents of universities within the Southern Baptist Convention who were asked the same question. And one of them got asked by Brandon Allen, and one of them got asked by Aaron Wright. And these two presidents were Danny Akin and Jason Allen. And they were asked, where do you stand on equal protection for preborn children and the criminalization of abortion? And their response, as you said, is kind of evasive. I'm 100% pro-life from womb to tomb. I'm so pro-life. I've donated thousands of dollars to pro-life organizations. I'm so pro-life. We're not asking whether you're pro-life. We asked very specifically whether you support equal protection and the making of abortion to be homicide in our laws. Mm-hmm. But again, Danny Akin and Jason Allen, when they were asked this ahead of Al Mohler being asked, Al Mohler went at the end of all the presidents. Basically, like you said, not answering the question, just talking about how pro-life they are. And this is what we see from politicians. When we go and ask a politician, hey, why didn't you co-author the bill to abolish abortion? I'm 100% pro-life. You can see it on my website. You can see it on my scorecard from Oklahomans for Life, from National Right to Life. I'm as pro-life as it gets, 100% pro-life. It's the same answer. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they don't want to have to speak to the actual dispute. They don't want to have to speak to whether or not preborn children should be made equal. They just want to be able to say pro-life. And every time they do it, the people in the crowd clap like crazy. They just hear pro-life and they just start clapping every time. Mm-hmm. It's the thing they know that they can go to, that people will identify with, because they don't understand what's happening. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so we need to shift that. Mm-hmm. We need to make it so that when they're asked about abolition or equal protection and they say, I'm 100% pro-life, we need all those people to not be impressed by that.
Yeah. And this is why we never, ever, ever speak positively of the term pro-life. We never phrase it as, this is the pro-life response. We should be for equal protection. Instead, we say, no, the pro-life response is to say no equal protection, no abolition of abortion. That is the pro-life response. And all of their appeals from the stage to the pro-life movement is perfectly in line with their position that they do not support equal protection, because that is what the pro-life movement believes.
And they said it very clearly in the open letter, which was written and co-signed by almost every single prominent pro-life organization that is engaged politically.
Yeah.
Almost all of them.
Mm-hmm. So people, until they get sick of even the term pro-life, like understanding what that means and it being entirely consistent and the same thing as being against equal protection and not for the abolition of abortion, we're not going to see change. Like, we're not going to see the mainstream pro-life people change their position and become abolitionists until we start to see that shift. Like, degrading pro-life-ism and promoting abolitionism are so the same work that they need to be inseparable. Some people try to separate them. They try to just not play the language game, not do anything with the pro-lifers, just say, oh yeah, we're pro-life, so let's support equal protection. But no, you actually have to put down the opposing side. You actually have to say, this side is wrong, and we don't want to be part of them. We want to separate from them. So yeah, I think that was made clear by all of this. The room was definitely not with us this year, and it was because of a lot of these appeals to being pro-life and that sort of thing. And so I think that we're going to have to see, obviously we've been saying this for a while, but we're going to have to see people shifting from this insistence on being pro-lifers. We're not pro-lifers. We don't want to be pro-lifers.
Yeah.
We haven't been pro-lifers since the abolitionist movement started. That's not the way that we should be going. We should be going the opposite direction.
Yeah, and we see this from a lot of the pro-life organizations. They know that the key to keeping people kind of in the dark about the distinctions between the pro-life movement and the abolitionist movement is to blur the linguistic lines. And so we see groups like Students for Life right now. They've been doing it for years, actually, calling themselves abolitionists. And even more recently, starting to use equal protection. They're starting to use abolitionist language. Mm-hmm. Americans United for Life is the same way. They're starting to steal our language because they know that blurring that line is the key to keeping people from understanding there's a clear thing over here and there's a clear thing over here. Blurring the line, saying we're all pro-life, we all want the abolition of abortion, we're all in some sense abolitionists, we're all in some sense pro-life.
Yeah.
That is the key to keeping people in the dark about this thing over here being clearly distinct from this thing over here. And the pro-life incrementalists know that. And so stop playing right into their hands by blurring the lines, by calling yourself a pro-lifer or a pro-life, a true pro-lifer, however you want to put it. You're playing into their hands when you do that. And so, we're not saying that, that we're not saying anything other than that's not a helpful way to go about trying to convince people to adopt this way of doing it instead of this way of doing it.
And we all know that. Any Christian knows that. They know that language is important for distinguishing theological camps. They know that it's important for doing systematic theology. They know that in order for you to think clearly or at all, you need to make distinctions in language. Like, you are going to be a fogged brain zombie if you don't make clear distinctions in your language. It helps you to frame issues clearly. Yeah. And I don't think that I would have anywhere near as much clarity on so many issues, presuppositionalism, Calvinism, Arminianism, name the issue, unless I had clear defining language that actually made it a distinct difference. Yeah. You cannot build a framework for people to think out of unless they have a language to put it in. And you blurring the line makes it so that they can't think clearly. Yeah. It makes it so that you can have a room full of people, 8,000 people, totally swayed by language like pro-life, when you're not willing to make distinctions and say abolition is what we need to be, abolitionists is what we need to be, not pro-lifers.
Yep. So that's a quick aside to our other abolitionists who are watching this. Let's get back to Anaheim and what was going down in SBC. So that was kind of the worst of it as far as abolition and equal protection goes. And one last thing that we'll touch on in closing here, which has some ties into abolition, but not all of it, but we want to talk about because it's what a lot of people are talking about right now, and that is Rick Warren and the testimony that he gave and the response of the SBC to Rick Warren. Now, Rick Warren is a pastor of one of the largest churches, if not the largest church in the SBC, and they started ordaining women pastors last year. Now, there was a motion made at last year's convention, a motion that was affirmed by the messengers, that the SBC Credentials Committee needs to look into Rick Warren's church to see if they are abiding by the Baptist faith and message, and if not, whether or not they should be, basically disfellowshipped from the SBC. And the Credentials Committee basically comes back and says, well, with Rick Warren's church, we have Rick using a different definition of the word pastor. And so what we need a whole nother committee to create to look into what the meaning of the word pastor is as used in the Baptist faith and message. And then after that report from this new committee, then we'll be more equipped to make a recommendation about Rick Warren's church. Yeah. Now, that's nuts. Rick Warren's church hired Andy Wood and Stacy Wood to be, quote unquote, from Rick Warren in an email that he sent out to his congregation. He said, I have found, quote unquote, God's couple to lead our congregation, right? They're not just hiring like a children's pastor who's a woman and it's really just more of a coordinator, but they're just using the word pastor kind of informally.
Incorrectly.
No.
Yeah.
Right, incorrectly. It's not just an ecclesiology or terminology problem. They are actually bringing on a woman to be part of God's couple to lead the congregation, an elder.
Yeah.
Right? Clearly, blatantly, this should not be difficult. We should not need to create all these committees and do all this research. Clearly in violation of Scripture, clearly in violation of the BF&M. This should not be difficult, but the committee is making it very, very difficult, and it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, one way to try to deceive God's people is to change the definition of words that everybody knows. You know, there's some people who have the really dumb position that everybody is a pastor. Like, very stupid. Like, that is not the case. No, not everybody's a pastor. Biblically, there is a clear office of pastor, and that's not something that should be disputed. But what wolves do is they change the definition of what pastor means. They creep on in and they go directly against the Scriptures by changing what it is that we mean when we say pastor. And so this does have some relevance to the abolition issue, because we were talking about language just a little while ago, and the pro-lifers, they really did create the word pro-life. Like, they made it up as a defining label for their movement. And so they have guarded that term for its entire existence. They have had the right to guard that term for its entire existence. And that's what you need to do with words. You have to guard them. And people knew that when they heard that. So Dr Mueller, he came up and he gave a response to this. And he says, well, everyone knows what a pastor is. And if we have to create a committee every single time one of the words in the Baptist Faith and Message is contested, then we're in a lot of trouble, basically.
Right. And he said, like, you know, Dr Mueller was one of the authors of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, and he said, we chose the word pastor because at the time we were told, and we're all in agreement, that pastor was the clearest word to talk about what we were trying to talk about. Like, everyone who wrote this, myself included, and everyone, all the co-authors, knew what the word pastor meant. We were in agreement about what the word pastor meant. And this should not be hard. This is not hard. And so Dr Mueller, again, he was very helpful on equal protection, and he was very helpful here in responding to Rick Warren and the Credentials Committee and what they were trying to do. So,
and that is the sort of contextualist, is that the word for it? Maybe thinking of a different word. When the Supreme Court, what is the view?
Originalist.
Originalist. That's sort of the originalist way of going about things. Like, what is the actual stated intent of the people at the time when they made this thing? And it is interesting that the ERLCs and all these, not the ERLC, the Resolutions Committee sort of follows on this. Well, we don't really know what it means now. We're going to have to try to rediscover it or whatever. But terms have to be guarded. They must be protected. And that we all understand that when it comes to pastors or that sort of thing. Otherwise, people might come in and believe stupid things like everybody's a pastor or women can be pastors or that sort of thing. That is the tactic of people that are trying to smuggle in all kinds of bad stuff. And so nobody questions what it means to be an abolitionist for the most part. Like, well, there's people that try, but abolitionists guard that term. Like, we say, no, you're not an abolitionist if you don't believe that we should defy the Supreme Court, if you don't believe that equal protection is something we should pursue, or if you believe that incrementalism is a good approach. You are not an abolitionist. You're not historically an abolitionist. You're not an abolitionist here and now. You weren't even claiming to be an abolitionist before the abolition movement came on the scene. You're not an abolitionist. And so when this comes up as an issue, everyone who gets to an opportunity to ask a question who's critical of it, it says, no, you're not a pastor. That is not what a pastor is. That's the way that you guard a term when people try to pervert it and change it and make it something that it isn't. So it is instructive for people, if you're looking at this issue and you're seeing how can people be so ridiculous about, like, changing the definitions of something that we all know that is a biblically defined term. That speaks to this issue. Like, this is the way that you should think about things like abolition and pro-life. They have their term and they're going to guard it, and they're going to do a much better job about guarding it than you are about changing the definition of it. So use a better term. You know?
Chaos and misunderstanding about what terms mean doesn't benefit the good guys in virtually any dispute. Like, people who want to cause confusion are those who don't want the public in general to understand clear categories and ideas. So again, it's not helpful at all to blur distinctions. And as you said, this points that out very clearly. And so, that's kind of what went down in Anaheim last week. And so, again, there were some disappointing things. The fact that, that there was an effort to not allow these issues to be debated was annoying, but the issue was debated, much to Rob Collingsworth's, I'm sure, disappointment. Al Mohler spoke very much in favor of our position, which was awesome, at least as it relates to equal protection. And there was good debate that happened with the ERLC and the messengers. Lots of good things came out of Anaheim. Lots of connections were made for pastors in Kentucky and Michigan, places where we didn't previously have many connections with many local abolitionists. And so lots of good did come out of Anaheim. We are very encouraged coming out of Anaheim. And lots of good stuff went down.
Yeah, and for those who are looking to sort of leave the SBC, not to weigh in on this too much, but, my recommendation from looking at all the stuff that happened, all the fruit that happened from it, would be to just reduce your funding maybe, but don't leave the SBC. There is still a lot of... I don't think you should leave the SBC after what we saw. There are people that are being convinced by our efforts going in and trying to get people to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fruit that's being born, even in defeats. And I think a lot of times there's more fruit from defeat. When they clearly make their position known, that they're standing against truth, they're standing against the law of God, the word of God, that's when a lot of people's light bulb moment happens and they realize what's happening. Yeah. And in some ways, the defeats that came out of this year might be even more compelling to people than our victory from the year before. So I would strongly consider staying in the SBC, fighting the good fight, bringing these issues every single year because it's important. And even if we lose, we win. So.
Yep. So good things are happening. And for those who are either long-term listeners or people who've just discovered this podcast, we're able to put on this podcast and go to Anaheim to support equal protection resolutions. And then we went to Houston right after Anaheim. I flew straight to Houston on Wednesday evening to support an abolitionist resolution at the Republican Party of Texas convention. And so lots of stuff's going on, and to do all this stuff, we need your guys' help. We need your guys' financial support. And I think from the Anaheim and Houston trips put together, I think we're still a little bit more than $1,000 down with all the travel and gasoline and all of that good stuff. Yeah. Gasoline is, I guess, the first thought that comes to my mind now.
Well, travel costs are just insane right now.
Yeah.
The flights, I've never seen them this expensive before. Yep. Gas is... In Oklahoma, it's $4.50. It's crazy.
In California, it's like $6.80.
Yeah, I filled up my truck today, and it was like $100. It was crazy. It's not cheap to travel around, but we do want to be at all these events, and we're having an impact at all of them: printing material, writing material, getting it out to people, having the one-on-one conversations that are sometimes necessary to get people to understand what the issues are.
Yep.
So definitely consider giving to not just all these events that we've been at, but our ongoing work, because this is something that we are doing full time. This is not like James doesn't have a side gig or a side hustle or something like that. I don't have a side gig or a side hustle or anything of that nature. This is our full-time work. This is what we want to be dedicating our time to, because it's vital. It's needed. We need people to be doing this stuff. So please consider giving. If you do give, you get entered in to win a drawing. People are going to stop believing that now. But you get entered in to win a drawing for a drawing. Yeah. Russell has a lot of really cool hand-drawn, pen and ink artwork that he's done for the abolition movement for years, and we give away one every single month to donors of any amount as long as they're a monthly donor. And this month, we're going to be giving away two because we missed last month. That's why people are starting to not believe it. But we are going to give away two to two of our supporters, just to try to bless them as they've blessed us. And hope you would consider jumping in on that and getting your name entered into win that.
Yep. So go to freethestates.org/donate if you would like to support us or become a monthly supporter of Free the States. We would really appreciate your guys' help so that we can continue supporting these resolutions and abolition bills and producing podcasts like this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next week on the Liberator podcast, where we are as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice.